Five of the Best is an opinion-based series on films which I have seen released during the chosen year. This is to celebrate previous years in film, not to cause any offence. All opinions are my own. Hi everyone, welcome back to 5 of the Best, a series in which we celebrate movies year by year. This video will consist of me discussing my 5 favourite films of this chosen year. This video we're discussing the halfway point for the 2010s-2015, so let's get started. Before we get into our top 5, here are the honourable mentions for this year. The Big Short, The Revenant, Project Almanac, Everest, Bridge of Spies, Straight Outta Compton, Steve Jobs, and Southpaw. Now, let's get on to the list and start with number 5. The Martian is directed by Ridley Scott and stars Matt Damon and Jessica Chastain. So starting off the year 2015, we start with The Martian. I would imagine a lot of people would have this in their top 5, maybe even top 3 movies of this year. And rightly so, because The Martian is actually one of those films. Yes, it has the sci-fi nature, yes it has the unique premise, yes it has the interesting, and certainly it has the crowd's interest. It has a reason to go to the cinema for. And I think a lot of non-movie-going audience or non-regular movie-going audience went to The Martian. And we do have that nearly every year, where we have a movie that kind of brings people out, even the people that wouldn't really go. You know, the people that you would see in the cinema and they would go, oh, I haven't been at the cinema in about 10 years, but I just had to come out to see this. Weirdly, that seemed to be the case for The Martian. I know it's based on novelisation, but I don't know where that came from, that it was this neat. Maybe it was marketed really well, and I suppose it probably was, because in reality, the premise itself is good, and it's an engaging one, and once you're in the film, it's really good. But to just say, astronaut lost on Mars on his own, that kind of undersells it. But going to see The Martian, and someone like Matt Damon in the lead role, I'm not a massive Matt Damon fan. I enjoy him in a lot of performances, and I think I've mentioned that previously, or maybe one of the other entries in 5 of the Best, where he has a lot of good performances in him, but I feel that there is some performances that leave me wanting when it comes to him as an actor. Now, and this is obviously excluding things like Good Will Hunting, which I would put head and shoulders above everything that he's ever done. Him along with Robin Williams in that film is just special, and you know, it has the following it has for a reason. But I would certainly put The Martian up there with Matt Damon's best performances for me, because to have this, and I suppose the best and the thing that made this movie so good, and what made The Martian such an engaging story, was the contrast, and the contrast of the story being told. You had the isolation of Matt Damon's character on Mars on his own, trying to science his way out of it. And then you have this very busy NASA space station with all these different characters, a lot of recognisable actors, people like Kate Mara, people like Sean Bean, people like Jeff Daniels, you know, people like Kristen Wiig, you know, a lot of different recognisable names and them bouncing off each other, and that's a really engaging element. But having that, again, I use that word contrast, because having that going so well and then him in the isolation, that really hits home. And it's something that's kind of understated, and it's one of the reasons the movie works so well. Because if you just had him in isolation, but there wasn't a busyness, you know, there wasn't a, you know, something to oppose the isolation, it wouldn't be as impactful, I feel. Whereas something like Castaway, which is a bit similar in that premise, whereas Castaway is solely Tom Hanks and a volleyball, Wilson. and of course, if you've been following the series, you know I love that film too. But in quite a different way. Yes, it has that isolation factor, but in that one, it solely is the isolation. Whereas The Martian isn't that. And I heard some people say that comparison, that it's essentially Castaway. I don't think so. I actually think they're very different films. Yes, on the outset, and I suppose if you're putting them in a very niche subgenre, maybe that is the case, that they do align in that way. But they're vastly different feelings, vastly different tones. But both very enjoyable. And I think with The Martian in particular, and I think with what this film does, and of course having somebody like Ridley Scott directing, which has so many I think he's appeared a good few times on Five of the Best as well as a director. So for him to take on a role, you know, for someone who's known best as Gladiator, and in that film to be so grounded, I suppose is the word, to have a sci-fi film like The Martian, and to have a character grounded on Mars. You get what I mean? Like, they have to make it home. And they... okay, that was a pun I didn't even mean to make. Because they're trying to make Mars their home, but also they're trying to make it home. You see, that's what we're here for. But aside from all that, The Martian is one of those films that it not only has the sci-fi epic nature, it has the cinematography, some wonderful scenes throughout this, of some wonderful visuals, some brilliant character moments as well. Not only the isolation and not only the battle of the human spirit that goes on, but also some touching, as I say, some emotional moments between the characters, and the chemistry between, you know, the team sent to save. There's a lot to enjoy here on a lot of different levels. It isn't just the isolation, it isn't just the premise. It's a mix of all, and it's mixed so well, and it's told so well. And of course, based on the novelization, which I admittedly haven't read, but having I suppose such a strong base, because I know that the novelization is so strong, and it kind of went back to the #1 charts of best-selling books around the time of this being released as well. I think that was a big counterpoint. A bit like whenever I talked about something like Gone Girl, where the novelization is so strong and the movie is so strong. And yes, I'm sure there's different factors. You know, there's always... I mean, that's going to be something that will forever be the case, where people will prefer the book or prefer the movie adaptation. That's always going to be the case. For me personally, I haven't read the book, but I love the movie. Martian is definitely one of those sci-fi films from the 2010s that you probably have seen, or if you haven't, it's probably on your watch list to watch it sometime, and I would certainly recommend you doing so. Number 4. Star Wars The Force Awakens is directed by J.J. Abrams and stars Daisy Ridley, John Boyega, Adam Driver, and Oscar Isaac. Right, now, before you go crazy, because we are getting into very controversial territory when it comes to talking about Star Wars in general. The previous Star Wars entry on 5 of the Best, I would imagine, was a similarly hot button issue. And, you know, this is the first time since I've started doing the channel a few years ago that I've really in any way talked about the sequel trilogy. So let's break this talk. Let's talk about The Force Awakens, yes, but let's talk about the sequel trilogy as a whole, and then let's talk about The Force Awakens. So, do I love the sequel trilogy? The answer as a whole is no. Because, and listen, at this point, you have heard everybody on YouTube, everybody on Twitter, everybody probably in your family, in your household, and your friends, everybody has their opinion on the sequel trilogy. So I'm not going to say anything new, I know that. What I will say is, how on this earth do you go into a major franchise that is so beloved, one of the most, if not the most recognizable franchise in movie history, and you're continuing the trilogy with the original characters, you've got one shot at this, and you go into it with no plan? Because let's get it right, The Force Awakens is a damn good film, and that's why we're about to talk about it, and I will defend that forever. I think The Force Awakens is one of the better Star Wars films. Is it in the top 3? No. Is it in the top 5? I don't... well, it might be. Depends what mood I'm in. Because The Force Awakens is a damn good introduction with great characters with a story to build on, Adam Driver as one of the... This is one thing that stands true through the whole sequel trilogy. Adam Driver is the best part of this. Daisy Ridley as Rey is fine, and definitely the best part of these movies, including The Force Awakens, is the dynamic between Kylo Ren and Rey. There's no doubt about that. Everything else is pretty good in The Force Awakens. And then after that, it completely falls off a cliff, because who goes into a trilogy and goes, right, well, we'll make the first one and we'll just wing it. We'll just see how it goes. It's absolute lunacy. They do a lot of stuff in The Force Awakens that's good. They do a lot of stuff in the Last Jedi that counteracts that. Not to say that The Last Jedi is an absolute travesty. Is it the worst Star Wars film? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think The Last Jedi has some redeemable qualities, but it did take a direction that I kind of agree with everybody where I went... Well, not everybody, but a lot of people where I went, that's an interesting route, to put it mildly. That's an interesting direction to take Star Wars in, especially in the current climate of where we were at and the hype for it, to take it in that direction. And I love Rian Johnson. The Knives Out... I mean, if you've been on this channel, you know my admiration for him with the Knives Out films. Both of them. So, for that, it was just intriguing and just kind of mind-boggling, the decisions made. I just think the sequel trilogy is such a shame. That's the long and short of it. But the reason it's such a shame is because The Force Awakens is so good. Now, does The Force Awakens absolutely take a lot of the premise from A New Hope, or Star Wars, the original? Yes, it does. Clearly the plot is there. Droids having to take a battle plan. I mean, the whole thing is very similar. But it's done well. And you know what? I mean, that's what it's down to. It's not really about... Okay, it is a carbon copy. If you were writing the script for both films, Episode 4 and Episode 7, you'd go, they're quite similar. They're quite similar to an extent where it's very obvious. But that doesn't mean it's not good. The Force Awakens does a brilliant job in introducing characters, reintroducing the legendary characters and the legacy characters, people like Leia and Han Solo and Luke Skywalker eventually. And again, that was all done so well solely in The Force Awakens. Every character is brought in, there's a motivation, there's an interesting point to each of them. And of course Luke Skywalker isn't in this film, really. But when we're talking about the other legacy characters, that certainly applies. They're brought in an engaging way, and there's so much to love in Force Awakens. And I think everybody, it had one of the biggest movie openings of all time. The box office speaks for itself. When you look at the numbers it did, people were certainly... The prequel trilogy didn't lessen the hype for Star Wars in any way. In actual fact, it built on it. And I suppose you could still say that to this day. No matter how well received the sequel trilogy was, or things like Mandalorian or Book of Boba Fett, or any of these television shows, or any kind of extension of the Star Wars universe, the popularity will always grow, and it will always be loved. And I think Star Wars, and I've heard it put this way before, because everybody loves their own pocket of Star Wars, if you get what I mean. People love The Mandalorian. Maybe people haven't watched any of the movies, but they've watched every single episode of The Mandalorian because they think Baby Yoda / Grogu is a wee cutie. And yeah, there's that. People have only played Jedi Fallen Order, the PS5 game. There's different things to love with Star Wars. And I suppose there's so much controversy. There's so much... I just think it's such a toxic situation with Star Wars. Everybody's so ready to... If it isn't perfect, it's awful. There's no in between. And I think for Force Awakens, I just think it's brilliant. I think if I was watching Star Wars, there's a lot to enjoy. But I just think there's so much that isn't really that good either. Because let's get it right, Phantom Menace is not a perfect film, and that is the understatement of the century, as is Attack of the Clones. You've heard my thoughts on Revenge of the Sith, so I'll not go into that again. The original trilogy is the original trilogy, and it is golden for a reason. And then the sequel trilogy is a fantastic start with just a shame afterwards. Just stick with the plan. Like, Rise of Skywalker just tries to counteract everything that was done in The Last Jedi. Like, why? If you're going down this route, just go with it. If Rian Johnson writes you a script, okay, maybe you don't like it, okay, maybe there's a good lot of backlash, of course. I don't know that there was ever such a backlash to any film in history, if we're being honest, and I don't know if there has been since, to the response to The Last Jedi. Like, the response to that film was crazy, and not in a good way. So, I mean, you can like a film, you can not like a film, but to have that, you know, boycotting everything. Anyway, there's so much politics to Star Wars, it's just not even worth it. But let's talk about Force Awakens, because that's it. We're done talking about the sequel trilogy. Let's just talk about Force Awakens. And the reason the Force Awakens is so good is because it reintroduces the characters, it introduces new characters. We've got Daisy Ridley, we've got John Boyega, we've got Adam Driver, Oscar Isaac. They're our new four. They're the new core four. And in them, we have brilliantly engaging characters that are easy to root for from the start. Not someone who you'll grow to love, not someone that takes a movie or two or three or four to go, actually, do you know what? I actually quite like them now. I didn't really like them at the start. Every character bounces off each other so well, the chemistry. And as I say, you've got the three mains, Daisy Ridley, John Boyega, and Oscar Isaac on one side, and then you've got Adam Driver. Now, Adam Driver is one of my favourite up-and-coming actors in Hollywood. And is it even worth saying up-and-coming at this point? Because he's been in so much, and has so much quality, and such a list of films he's been in so far that... could you even class him as up-and-coming? And another one, and I will say this, because... I know I didn't say I was going to talk about trilogy, but Oscar Isaac, and John Boyega, for that matter, are criminally underutilised in those second two films. However, The Force Awakens, both John Boyega and Oscar Isaac get a great outing. Great introduction to their characters. But of course, the main parts, the bread and butter of the movies is Daisy Ridley and Adam Driver. And are they doing a great job? I think they are. And I would say that continues more or less through the whole trilogy, because it's only them two that really matter. And that's where the story gets so lost along the way, because you get to the point where you don't care about anybody else. It's only them two. But in The Force Awakens, you've got so many characters, there's so many characters to enjoy. You've got the legacy characters like Han Solo and Chewbacca in the mix with John Boyega and Daisy Ridley, and they all get their moments. They all get moments to shine. And that's how you know a movie's been written well and it's been directed well. And in J.J. Abrams, of course, he has things like Super 8, obviously the Star Trek movies. There's so much that J.J. Abrams can bring to sci-fi, and if it's not going to be George Lucas, because let's be honest, the prequel trilogy is the prequel trilogy, and for him to take on this, for J.J. Abrams to take on The Force Awakens and to produce a film like this, the rest, Rise of Skywalker, yeah, okay, but I just love The Force Awakens. I still love The Force Awakens, and it is that thing where we talk about, and I think I've said this so many times on the 5 of the Best series, and I apologise for saying this so many times, but does a sequel, does a follow-up, does the next entries in the film, or a film franchise, or a series, or a trilogy, or anything like that, do they take away the quality from the first one? In this case, I would still watch The Force Awakens every so often. I watch The Force Awakens and I think to myself, what could have been? Because just think, if The Force Awakens had been as strong, if the other two had been as strong as The Force Awakens, who knows where we would be right now. But in reality, we're not. But I will always die on the hill that Force Awakens is one of the better Star Wars movies that has been made. And everything else is because we're now coming to the end of this. I've talked more than I should have, and I apologise for going on about the sequel trilogy and everything, but I do just want to say that The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker aren't going to appear in 5 of the best. They're not going to be honorable mentions. They're not going to be any entries on it. You know why that is? That's not, me joining any brigade of hate towards any of it. But I just don't love them. And this is about celebrating movies that I really enjoyed. And The Force Awakens definitely falls into that category. So with all that really long-winded way of saying that, let's move on to the next entry. Number 3. The Hateful Eight is directed by Quentin Tarantino and stars Samuel L. Jackson, Kurt Russell, and Jennifer Jason Leigh. So if you've been following 5 of the best, you'll know that if there's a Tarantino film released in a year, there's a high probability that it will appear on my top 5. I'm a major Tarantino fan. So many of his entries are usually topping these lists, or near the top, or certainly appearing in some form on a 5 of the best list. And with The Hateful Eight... Now, The Hateful Eight's a weird one, because a lot of the time, when people talk about the great Tarantino films, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody that puts Hateful Eight in their maybe top 2 or 3 of Tarantino films. And I also agree with that, because there is better entries. But the problem is, do you see whenever you make so many great films, and they all trying to do different genres but keep the same tone, the same level of dialogue, which of course we'll get onto, which I talk about every time when it comes to Tarantino, and I think there's a real difficulty for Tarantino to always emulate the same feeling of his films. You know what I mean? You know when Tarantino films have that same essence? Because Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, you can tell that there's an essence of the same there. Even with something like Jackie Brown and then Kill Bill. Yes, some of them have more of a fantastical nature, but there is always that essence there. Even something from Pulp Fiction to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. You can tell that the same feeling is there, even though a lot of time has passed, a lot of movies have been made in between that. There still is that essence of Tarantino. And I think with The Hateful Eight, it's one of the best examples of Tarantino's style being put in more of a rogue scenario. Because the scenario of Hateful Eight, being locked in this kind of cabin way out in the snowstorm in a long time ago, basically. The Hateful Eight, I think it's one of... How do I put this? It's a shining example of what makes Tarantino great. And you might be saying to yourself, well, why is it not higher in your ranking of Tarantino films? Why is it not higher in your ranking of this year? Because The Hateful Eight, it isn't my favourite. But it doesn't mean that I don't love it. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have the same love and care and level of dialogue. And yes, if you have been here and you have heard me talk about Tarantino films, you will have heard me say this so many times. But the dialogue in these movies are a work of art. The chemistry, the charisma that every character has, and every character is so over the top, but to a believable extent. The Hateful Eight actually exemplifies that maybe more than any of them. Because people like Daisy Donahue, isn't that how you say it in the film? And for someone like Samuel L. Jackson as Major Marcus Warren in this, he is... Samuel L. Jackson is clearly one of Tarantino's guys. You know what I mean? The same way Uma Thurman is one of his main girls. Samuel L. Jackson's the man. He just is. We can try and analyse what's so good, but Samuel L. Jackson is just one of the coolest actors there's ever been. He just is such an intriguing... You could listen to every word he says in every scene, in every movie, whether that be a Tarantino film, whether that be a real dramatic piece of acting, whether that be something fun. Samuel Jackson is just so... It's so hard not to be on his side in a film, even if he is an anti-hero, even if he is a villain. Even in something like Kingsman I talked about not too long ago, where he's the villain of the piece. He is so engaging and so charismatic. It's so hard not to feel a love for his character, from what he brings to these characters. And him as the Major in this is there's some moments in this, and obviously I don't want to say really anything about plot details, but there's some moments in The Hateful Eight that are just so memorable and so iconic when it comes to just this kind of era of time that the movie is set as well. You know, the kind of double revolver, kind of shooting tooting, you know what I mean? That era of time. The Hateful Eight is really... I don't know. I just feel that when it comes to talking about The Hateful Eight, it's like... I feel like I have to defend it, even though it has nothing to... You know what I mean? Like, people kind of go, oh, well, it's not the best one. But, like, so? It's... Yes, okay, it's not as good as Pulp Fiction. Yeah, so is most movies. You know... I don't know. It's so hard to put into words about The Hateful Eight, and it's definitely one of those ones. When I looked at Tarantino's list of films, when I was starting 5 of the best, or certainly a few videos ago, and I was thinking, what other Tarantino videos do I have to... Or sorry, what films on the videos do I need to talk about with Tarantino? And Hateful Eight was always one where it's like, how am I going to talk about that? Because there's so much to love, as there always is. There's so many of the Tarantino-isms that are in so much effect here in such a great way, and the way the characters do you know what, that's how I'm going to leave it. The characters, the dialogue, the time period, the cinematography, some of the visuals in Hateful Eight as well are just picturesque. So much to love in The Hateful Eight. If you like Tarantino, I don't get how you wouldn't love this. I don't get how you wouldn't love The Hateful Eight. Because there's just so much to love it. And that's why I definitely recommend it. Number 2. Mad Max Fury Road is directed by George Miller and stars Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron. Now, when I talked there about The Martian, and I said most people would have that in like their top 5 movies of the year, or even top 3 for some people, I would guess that a majority of people, when they look back at the year 2015, Mad Max Fury Road is maybe the most memorable for them. And I would agree. I think if I look back, and of course, when you get to number 1, you'll see my love for it, and I'll explain why. But Mad Max Fury Road is kind of the movie of the year. It's the movie of 2015. It's the one that's the most memorable. It's the one that reignited because those films from years ago, 20, 30, 40 years ago, whatever it was, with Mel Gibson, from what I've seen, those films don't have any of the... There isn't really that worth, there isn't that value, there isn't that care of the craft that is put into this film. Because Mad Max Fury Road, to tell the story it does, because it is so wacky, it's so out there, it's so crazy, but to have a heartfelt story in that situation, in that scenario, and like, let's get it right, this is one of the most vehicular why would you even describe this? Vehicular carnage, even in something like Death Race, it's not this. Mad Max Fury Road is just now this is going to go cliche movie poster mode for sure, but I can't believe I'm about to say this, but it is a non-stop thrill ride from start to finish that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Yeah, I'm cringing too. But with Mad Max, but it is that. It is, the whole film is just non-stop. And I know I've said that from a few films, and when I talk about engagement, but this movie has, oh my god, there's too many puns here, but there is no breaks on this film. It just keeps on the madness. The whole film is these spectacular, and I mean, I've mentioned it a few of the films we've talked about already here. I just mentioned it with Hateful Eight. I mentioned it certainly with The Martian, but this is where this takes the cake for this year. The visuals in Mad Max Fury Road are breathtaking. This is one of the best looking films, and you might say to yourself, well, is it all not in sand? Trust me. The visuals in Mad Max Fury Road are astounding. They just look fantastic. The set pieces, the vehicular madness and manslaughter and crashes and craziness and all of it, it should not be as engaging and as enjoyable as it is. Because in this, yes, you have the craziness of the cars flipping over each other, exploding, the warfare between the vehicles. Yes, they have that. But to have that not get tiresome for 2 hours, the movie's exactly 2 hours, and for it to never grind to a halt, again, another car joke, yeah. But there's so, like that, this is such an achievement. Mad Max Fury, where did this come from? How did Mad Max Fury, whose idea was it? We're like, right, we're gonna you know that Mel Gibson thing that didn't really do that well and wasn't that great a long time ago? Right, we're gonna fully reinvent that. We're gonna put Tom Hardy in the lead role. We're gonna have Charlize Theron. This movie is awesome. Mad Max Fury Road is one of the most fun movies in recent memory. Yes, is it the most heartfelt story and emotional? You're not crying your eyes out at the end of Mad Max Fury Road, of course not. But are you enthralled? Are you loving what's going on screen? Absolutely. This movie is so much fun. So enjoyable. And again, whoever that executive was in that boardroom that went, do you know what we're going to do, guys? I've got a great idea. And he then says, we're going to revive Mad Max. As I say, we're going to put Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron in the lead roles. And we're kind of, and they're very stoic characters. There isn't a lovey nature to anybody. No, this is not a loving film. There's no inviting characters. It's a very harsh and brutal wasteland that they live in, and they survive in is probably the better term. Everything about Mad Max Fury Road, it nearly shouldn't work. If you were looking at the premise, and I know I've said this already in a few of these films, when you talk about the premise and, you know, to bring a script to life to this extent is fantastic. And the credit totally to the direction of this film and George Miller, but also to the performances of Tom Hardy. This is around the time when he becomes the man. You know, we're not too long after being around the time of Peaky Blinders. Tom Hardy is the man. He was then, he is now, but when it comes to Mad Max Fury Road, and do you know what? This is the thing. And I actually watched this again recently, on the lead up to doing this video and talking about these movies again. And Mad Max was one I thought, I'm definitely going to watch that again. Because I want to see... I'd actually had only seen it once before the rewatch there recently. And it's amazing that they didn't make a sequel. I did hear in the grapevine that they are making a Furiosa like spin-off kind of story. Is it with Anya Taylor-Joy? Is that right? Which will be strange. But it's amazing to me that they never capitalised on this, because this is 2015. That's 8 years ago now. How on this earth did they not even make it, you know, like a Netflix show, an Amazon show, another movie, make this into a trilogy? Anything. But then on the flip side, which again, tying it back to what we talked about earlier, sometimes the first ones of trilogies don't always, you know, the tone that's set in the first one doesn't really carry through. And to have Mad Max Fury Road as this one standalone great epic, it might be my favourite vehicle movie. I don't know if that means anything at all, but if you know what I mean, like, because it's so, you know, there's so much vehicular warfare, so much vehicular destruction. There's so much to love in Mad Max Fury Road. And admittedly, if I didn't love my number one so much, Mad Max Fury Road would probably be number one for this year. And the reason it's not number one is because my number one is number one. Sicario is directed by Denis Villeneuve and stars Emily Blunt, Josh Brolin, and Benicio del Toro. Now, if you looked at the movies for 2015, you probably thought he's going to have Sicario somewhere. Or maybe he just hasn't seen it. There is, of course, that scenario where sometimes I haven't seen a film, and then I would have loved it, and then it maybe would have appeared on 5 of the best. But in this scenario, when it's talking about Sicario, this movie is so far and away my favourite film of the year. It's a strong 5, and the other 4 are great, including Mad Max Fury Road, who you just heard me wax lyrical about, and I love a lot. But none of the other four have, and certainly me personally, I don't have as much of appreciation for as I do with Sicario. Sicario is a special film, just in the case of the premise, and again, it's one of those ones, and I feel like I'm repeating myself so many times when I say a lot of this, but when you branch out your cinema tastes, because whenever someone said to me, "Oh, you got to watch Sicario. It's about like drug smuggling around Mexico and all, and yeah, you'll enjoy it." I'm like, "What? No, I probably won't enjoy it. I mean, I don't mind Emily Blunt. Josh Brolin, didn't really know him that much at this point. Benicio del Toro is alright." And then I watched it, and Sicario is one of the most intense, and this is a heart-pounding film. The whole thing, you're on edge with the characters, and having Emily Blunt. Now, Emily Blunt, I enjoy a lot. Things like Edge of Tomorrow, in particular, not that long ago, I think she's great. But this is far and away my favourite performance of her. Even in something like A Quiet Place, and she brings the tension in it, of course, and she does a great job. But nothing like this. Her in this kind of fish out of water scenario, and being the audience surrogate to this scenario. Because if you were just dropped in this and you knew nothing about any of this, which admittedly I don't, I wasn't any kind of privy to all the drug smuggling and all that stuff. It's not something I know anything really about. So I'm very much like Emily Blunt's character, but to have her and to live through her in this film and kind of be as shocked as she is when the scenarios go on. Like, this film is a hard hitter. It doesn't pull any punches, but oh my god, is it amazing. And before I go on and talk about the story and the performances and everything, I just want to make a mention for Denis Villeneuve, because this guy, how dare he make so many good films out of just nowhere. Like, he has came on the scene and he's like basically owning it, because to have something like Sicario, to have something like Blade Runner 2049, which I'm sure we'll talk about when we get there, to have something like Dune not that long ago, and of course Part 2, this guy's the man. Denis Villeneuve as a filmmaker, as a director, and for what he does is just brilliant. And he's shown so much quality in what he can bring to the screen, and how he gets so much out of his actors and actresses. And in this, like, Emily Blunt, she does such a great conveyance of the importance of the task that she's been tasked with, but also the kind of shell shock of war, the shell shock of battle, and basically just the awful nature of what she's going through is conveyed so well. Like, you're so empathetic to her character and what she gets put through in this film. And to have that, you've got the hardened veterans in Josh Brolin and Benicio del Toro. Now, Josh Brolin, of course, known for a certain Purple Man in more recent times, but Josh Brolin has a lot of acting chops. And to be honest, when it was Goonies time, I don't know that I thought he would be at this level. But he's awesome in this. Josh Brolin brings a lot. He's not just a tough guy. Like, he's got a lot of quality and a lot of things he can bring to these films. And the other one, and I want to talk about this one in particular, because Benicio del Toro, before I saw Sicario, didn't really get the hype of. And that maybe sounds strange to say, because of course he's been around for a good while now and has been in so many things and is so adored by so many people. And I just didn't really get the hype. And there's a few actors I've said that about. But oh my god, has that been wiped from my brain instantly by the time Sicario is finished. Because Benicio del Toro is my favourite part of this film. Yes, of course, Emily Blunt is the lead, and of course she is the audience surrogate. She is the reason that we get engaged as you know, watching this movie. But Benicio del Toro is the reason. I think he's like, you know, this movie is already a cake, but he is the cherry on top. He is the finishing piece, then the reason that we go home happy. And that's probably a weird thing to say because of the nature of his character, the nature of the acts in this film. Maybe going happy is a weird terminology to use. But Sicario is just so amazing. I just feel like I could wax lyrical about this film for so long. Is it one of my favourite films ever? No, but it is definitely one of my favourite films of this kind of era. And certainly of the 2010s. It's one of those ones that I will look back on so fondly. And I actually rewatched it. And you know what? I actually had seen it it wasn't one of those ones I actually seen in the cinema, admittedly. I only seen this film for the first time about 2017, 2018, and really loved it. And a bit like when I said there when I was talking about Mad Max, where I had seen it once and loved it, but I wanted to rewatch it again, just to see if I still have that same love. So they were the two I rewatched coming into this. And Sicario is just amazing. And it's one of those, I will definitely continue to rewatch it in years, certainly the years coming. And yes, there's a sequel, and it's not half as good, and it's a shame. But does that take away, and again, to tie it all together, does that take away from the quality of the first, or the original? No. In my opinion, it does not. I think Sicario is one of those great films of one of those premises that it wouldn't hook you in. A bit like when we talked about something like Whiplash, for example, and that's one of the best examples I can give. I could not care less about drumming. But when I watch Whiplash, that is one of my favourite films of that year. When I watched Sicario, did I care anything about drug smuggling or anything like that, about the border? No. Do I love Sicario? Absolutely. It's an amazing film, and that's why it's absolutely my favourite film of the year 2015. So that's been the year 2015. Now, I'm not going to say it's a very strong year because it's not, admittedly. It's one of those years that's it's between a few strong years, and it's in that unfair spot. But does it have some movies of great quality? It does. And it's particularly in those top three of this year. Because The Force Awakens, yes, it is what it is. And with The Martian, of course, it's one of those family enjoyable sci-fi adventures. But in those top three, they're the ones that I really... the ones that you would take home with you. The ones that you would keep in your memory. And you would go back to and revisit on multiple times. Hateful Eight, Mad Max Fury Road, and Sicario are three films I would definitely continue to revisit in lots of years from now. Force Awakens, of course, because Star Wars is timeless. Love them or hate them. Adore some, hate some. Star Wars will always be there. And you can't escape that. You can't escape that. And The Martian's it's just a lot of fun. It's just a really enjoyable movie. But let's talk about the ones that were close to breaking into that top 5, because of the honourable mentions, there's a few good ones. I think there was only really 2 that might have broken in. The first one was The Big Short. Again, a little bit what I talked about there with Sicario, where do I care about the stock markets? Do I care about, brokers and that kind of scene? No, I don't. And the housing market and things like that? Do I give a toss about any of that? No. Is The Big Short an awesome film? It is. So it was very close to getting into the top 5. And the other one was Straight Outta Compton. Straight Outta Compton, a bit kind of the first of those movie biopics. Because, when we talk about the movie music biopics, when we had things like Bohemian Rhapsody, we have things like Rocketman, we have things like I Will Always Love You, we have Elvis, we have all these films. But Straight Outta Compton was kind of the start of that. And it's really good. And it kind of had a real resurgence for the NWA. And, I think that really brought the music to a new generation for them. And that was also very close to making it into the top 5. And the other one, now this is one that you probably were like, hang on, that's an honourable mention? I'd have that in my top 1, 2, 3, whatever it was. The Revenant. Right. I like The Revenant. Am I glad that Big Leo got his Oscar? I am. Should he have got it for Wolf of Wall Street? Yes, he should have. don't love The Revenant, though. I enjoy it, but I think a lot of it is a bit... I don't know. It's just... It doesn't connect with me, and I don't love it as much as a lot of people do. But yeah, I mean, it's fine. It's fine. It's good, it's above average, but I don't think I would ever rush to watch it again. But it's hard to deny the quality of The Revenant, and that's why it's definitely an honourable mention. I wouldn't have been unfair enough to leave it off the honourable mentions, because it does deserve that. But it was never breaking into my top 5, because I kind of knew my top 5 for this year. The only one, as I say, was The Martian, The Big Short, and Straight Outta Compton. Those 3 were kind of... If you had to do a 5, 6, and 7, Big Short would be 6, and Straight Outta Compton would be 7. There you go. There you go. You got 7 of the best this year. But yeah, that's been the year 2015. As I say, a good year because they all are, because they all have their worth, but it's just situated between some better years. And the better years will probably be next video. And if you want to be here for that next video, I would love you to stick around, subscribe, hit the bell, leave a like, let me know you enjoyed the video. And if you do, I will hopefully see you in the next one. Bye, guys. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Before you go, here are some of my other videos. For updates and information on upcoming videos, the best place to find us is my Twitter. Much love, everyone.